Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a place that feels a million miles away. A place shrouded in the humid, pre-winter air of 1937 China. Imagine you're there, standing on a bustling street in Nanjing, the Republic of China's capital. The air is thick with the smell of sweet osmanthus and the low, constant murmur of millions of lives lived in this ancient city. You hear the clatter of rickshaws, the shouts of vendors selling steaming bowls of noodles, and the distant, rhythmic chiming of a temple bell. But there's a new sound now, a nervous hum that cuts through the usual city symphony. It's the sound of rumors, a low, persistent whisper carried on the wind from the east. It's the news of what's happening in Shanghai, of the brutal siege and the stories of unimaginable violence. You probably won't survive this, not in the way you are now. So pay close attention. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel a knot forming in your stomach as you walk, a sense of foreboding that grows with each passing day. The newspapers, what few you can find, are filled with grim headlines. The Japanese Imperial Army, fresh from their victory in Shanghai, is on the move. Their destination is clear: Nanjing. You've heard the stories of their tactics, not just of military might, but of a calculated, terrifying cruelty that seems to defy the rules of warfare as you know them. You hear about entire villages being put to the torch, and about civilians being caught in the crossfire in a way that feels less like an accident and more like a deliberate act. The city, normally so vibrant and full of life, is beginning to empty out. The wealthy and well-connected are fleeing by train and by boat, their faces grim and their luggage heavy with the few possessions they could grab. You see them go, and a pang of panic shoots through you. Should you go, too? But where would you even go? The roads are choked with refugees, and the rivers are patrolled by gunboats. For many, like you, staying feels just as dangerous as leaving. Meanwhile, a man named John Rabe is in the city, but his world is very different from yours. You don't know him yet, but he's a key figure in this unfolding drama. He's a German businessman, a high-ranking member of the Nazi Party, of all things. And he's been in China for years, managing the Siemens Company's operations. He's a respected figure among the Western community, a man who enjoys his quiet life and his position of authority. He's seen the conflict escalate, of course, but from a safe distance, from behind the walls of his comfortable home. But the reports from Shanghai are starting to shake his complacency. He's hearing the same whispers you are, but he's also receiving more detailed, official-sounding communiques from the German embassy. Historians still debate whether Rabe's initial concern was purely humanitarian or if he was also motivated by a desire to protect German business interests in the city. Whatever the initial reason, the scale of the impending disaster is becoming impossible to ignore. A quirky tidbit: Rabe, like many expatriates, enjoyed a social life that revolved around the small, interconnected Western community, a bubble that was now threatening to burst. You can almost see him now, a sturdy man with a neat moustache, sitting in his office, his brow furrowed as he reads another telex. He's wrestling with something, a decision that will change not only his life, but the lives of tens of thousands of people. He knows the Japanese are coming, and he knows that the Chinese military, despite their best efforts, is unlikely to hold them back for long. The sound of distant artillery fire, once just a faint rumble, is growing louder. It's no longer a distant threat, it's a terrifying reality. The storm is here, and you are standing right in the middle of it. The storm is indeed gathering, and as the city prepares for the worst, you see an unusual scene unfolding. The foreign community, normally a collection of distinct little groups, the Americans at the university, the British at their consulates, the Germans at their businesses, is now huddled together, bound by a shared sense of dread. You see them gather, not in a grand ballroom for a party, but in a small, stuffy room, a makeshift war council, and at the head of the table is John Rabe. He's no soldier, no politician, just a businessman, but his German nationality and high-ranking position in the Nazi Party suddenly give him a unique kind of leverage. It's an absurd, almost darkly comedic situation. The one person with a little diplomatic muscle to throw around in this chaos happens to be an official representative of the very same ideology that's causing so much trouble back in Europe. You can almost hear the unsaid thought hanging in the air. Well, this is awkward. Rabe, with a surprisingly calm demeanor, is laying out his plan. It's a bold one, almost ludicrous in its simplicity: a neutral zone. A place where Chinese civilians, disarmed soldiers, and anyone else seeking sanctuary can go. He's proposing the creation of a Nanjing International Safety Zone. It sounds so official, so bureaucratic, doesn't it? As if you could just draw a line on a map and expect a conquering army to respect it. But Rabe is a man of process. He believes in the power of a signed document and a well-stated argument. He's meticulously drafting letters to the Japanese embassy, to the foreign consulates, to anyone who might listen. He's trying to build a great wall of bureaucracy to stop an invading army. He's not using swords or guns, he's using fountain pens and a polite, if firm, tone. The irony isn't lost on you. This is a war being fought with bombs and bullets. But its potential salvation is being negotiated with treaties and protocols. But you, watching this unfold from a distance, feel a pang of cynicism. The Japanese have already shown a flagrant disregard for international norms in Shanghai. What makes them think a piece of paper will stop them here? This is a fringe tidbit. But some of the other foreigners at the meeting, initially skeptical, were swayed not by Rabe's idealism, but by his practicality. He had a reputation for being a meticulous planner and a shrewd negotiator. They knew he was the only one who could get this done. John Rabe's Nazi affiliation, which would be a source of shame and revulsion in any other context, is a strange asset here. Germany and Japan are allies, part of the anti-Comintern pact. It gives Rabe a certain amount of, let's call it, street cred, with the Japanese command. A flimsy but potentially life-saving shield. A mainstream historical fact here is that this bizarre alliance between Germany and Japan was a key factor in the Japanese military's decision to at least listen to Rabe's proposal. The others in the room are a fascinating bunch. You've got American missionaries, a British journalist, a few other European businessmen. They're all united in their desperation. But historians still debate whether their motives were purely altruistic or if they also saw this as a way to protect their own interests and, perhaps, their own lives. Whatever the case, they are now a team, with John Rabe at the helm. He's not just a Nazi businessman anymore. He's a leader, an organizer. He's the one who gets things done, who knows how to navigate the complex diplomatic channels. You hear him talking about mapping out the zone, about gathering supplies, about convincing the city's remaining population to trust this fragile promise of safety. You see him, a man who once spent his days thinking about profit margins and factory output, now thinking about how to feed and house tens of thousands of people. It's a monumental, almost insane task. He's building an ark, and the floodwaters are already at the city gates. The rumble of the distant guns is now a continuous roar, with the blueprint for the safety zone now drawn. You watch as the plan's architects, a motley crew of Westerners, begin to take shape as an official body. They call themselves the International Committee for the Nanjing Safety Zone, a name that sounds much more grand and organized than the reality of their situation. At their first official meeting, you see them gathered, their faces etched with a mix of fear and grim determination. John Rabe, the de facto leader, sits at the head of the table, his demeanor a stark contrast to the nervous energy of the others. The room is filled with a bizarre collection of people, a microcosm of the city's foreign population. There's the American missionary, Minnie Vautrin, who will later become known as the Goddess of Mercy, a woman with a steely gaze and a resolve that seems to defy the chaos swirling outside. There's George Fitch, another American missionary, and Dr. Robert Wilson, a surgeon. They are joined by others, a German businessman, a Danish engineer, and a few more. It's a group that, under any other circumstances, would have little to do with one another. A quirky tidbit: one of the members, a British journalist, initially refused to leave his apartment, believing that his nationality would protect him, only to be convinced by the sheer desperation of the Chinese civilians seeking his help. It's a testament to how quickly the reality of the situation was setting in. This international committee is a strange bedfellows group, bound not by shared ideology or nationality, but by a shared purpose and a terrifying reality. They are all, in their own way, an act of defiance. They are defying the Japanese army's brutal advance, the Chinese army's frantic retreat, and even the indifference of their own home countries, many of whom have already evacuated their citizens and left the rest to their fate. The committee's first task is to formalize the zone's boundaries. You see them poring over maps, tracing lines with a pencil, marking out a section of the city that is roughly 2.5 square miles. It includes Nanjing University, the American Embassy, and a number of other foreign-owned properties. The idea is that these properties, with their international flags, will be respected by the Japanese. It's a fragile hope, a paper shield against a tidal wave of violence. A mainstream historical fact is that the zone was deliberately located in the northwest part of the city, away from the main battleground, and it was marked with large, white flags bearing the Chinese character for peace. The committee's formation itself becomes a crucial moment. Historians still debate whether the Japanese command would have even considered a safety zone if it hadn't been proposed by a German, a man from an allied nation. Rabe's Nazi affiliation, while morally complicated, was undeniably a key factor in getting the Japanese to the negotiating table, or at least to acknowledge the proposal. The Japanese government, while not officially sanctioning the zone, did give it a kind of tacit, ambiguous approval. They didn't say no, which in this case, was the closest thing to a yes that the committee was going to get. This lack of a clear, official endorsement would prove to be a major problem later on. As the committee works, you see the city outside their window slowly begin to lose its shape. The rumble of artillery is now joined by the scream of falling shells. The sky, which was once a clear winter gray, is now smudged with black smoke. The streets are no longer bustling with life, but with a panicked, desperate river of humanity, all flowing in one direction, towards the international safety zone. This hastily drawn-up plan, born out of desperation and an unlikely alliance, is now the only hope for hundreds of thousands of people. The committee, once a group of strangers, has become the last line of defense for a city on the brink. You can feel the tension in the air, a kind of breathless anticipation, as if the entire city is holding its breath, waiting for the first wave of the invasion to hit. As the International Committee frantically works to prepare the safety zone, you feel the atmosphere of the city shift from nervous dread to outright terror. The distant artillery fire is no longer a rumble. It's a constant, deafening roar, a hungry beast closing in on its prey. The Japanese forces, having met little effective resistance on their march from Shanghai, are now at the city walls. And with them comes a chilling directive, a grim edict that will forever change the nature of this war. The order, which you only hear about in whispers from frantic Chinese soldiers and terrified refugees, is simple and horrifying: spare no one. You learn this isn't a random act of a few rogue soldiers, but a systemic, deliberate policy from the highest levels of the Japanese command. A mainstream historical fact is that this brutal order was issued by Prince Yasuhiko Osaka, a member of the imperial family and a high-ranking general. This decree is not just about conquering a city, it's about breaking the will of a people. You see its effects almost immediately. The Chinese soldiers, who have been ordered to defend the city to the last man, are now facing an enemy that shows no mercy, even to those who surrender. The fighting is vicious and without quarter. The city's defenders, a mix of seasoned soldiers and hastily conscripted civilians, are being pushed back, their lines breaking under the sheer force of the Japanese assault. You hear the screams, the explosions, the chaotic din of a city under siege. You see soldiers running past you, their faces a mask of fear, their uniforms torn and covered in mud. A quirky tidbit: some of the Chinese soldiers, in a desperate attempt to save their own lives and blend in with the civilian population, discard their uniforms and weapons. A frantic effort to become invisible, to shed their identities as combatants. But even this act of self-preservation proves to be a death sentence, as the Japanese soldiers are under orders to kill anyone they suspect of being a soldier, whether they're armed or not. The decree's brutal implications extend to the civilian population as well. You hear stories of atrocities happening just outside the city walls, of villages being wiped out and of civilians being used for bayonet practice. This isn't just collateral damage, it's a deliberate campaign of terror. It's an attempt to demoralize and destroy. The line between soldier and civilian, which in any normal war is a sacred boundary, has been completely erased. You see this reflected in the eyes of the people around you, a deep, visceral fear that goes beyond the normal fear of war. It's the fear of a hunter who knows their prey has been marked for extinction. Historians still debate whether this level of brutality was a spontaneous act of a few rogue commanders or a calculated strategy of the Japanese High Command. Regardless of the debate, the result is the same. The city of Nanjing is about to be subjected to a level of violence that defies comprehension. The International Committee's plan, which just a few days ago seemed so fragile, now feels like a life raft in a tsunami. You see people streaming into the safety zone, a panicked flood of humanity, all seeking shelter behind the flimsy protection of international flags and the promise of a German Nazi's influence. The roar of the battle is getting closer, the screams are getting louder, and you can feel the ground shake with each explosion. The Emperor's brutal decree has turned the city into a hunting ground. And you are one of the hunted. The city walls are breached. You don't see it happen, but you hear it, the cacophony of a final, desperate battle giving way to a new kind of silence, one filled with the sounds of chaos and fear. The Japanese forces are now pouring into the city. All around you, people are in a state of mass panic. They are running, not in any organized fashion, but in a desperate, every person for themselves scramble. You are swept up in this current, a river of humanity all flowing in one direction, towards the northwest corner of the city, towards the international safety zone. This is the zone of last resort, a flimsy haven built on a hope and a prayer. You join the tide of humanity, a throng of terrified souls. You see mothers carrying their children, old men hobbling along with canes, students with their arms full of books, all of them shedding their worldly possessions as they run, leaving a trail of discarded belongings in their wake. The streets, once so familiar, are now a landscape of terror. You pass burning buildings, the air thick with smoke and the smell of ash. You have to step over rubble and around abandoned rickshaws. The sound of gunfire, once distant, is now close, intimate, and terrifying. A mainstream historical fact is that over 200,000 civilians and disarmed soldiers ultimately sought refuge within the 2.5 square mile zone, a number far exceeding its planned capacity. This influx of people turns the zone from a sanctuary into a massive, overcrowded camp almost overnight. The International Committee, with John Rabe at its head, is completely overwhelmed. They planned for this, but they couldn't possibly have imagined the sheer scale of the human wave. You see them at the entrance to the zone, a few Westerners and the Chinese staff, trying to maintain some semblance of order. They are directing people to various camps and shelters, shouting instructions that are often lost in the din. You hear them saying, "Stay calm, follow the flags, we will do our best to protect you." The words sound so hollow against the backdrop of explosions and screams. It's a bit like trying to stop a hurricane with a polite request. As you get closer, you see the flags of various nations: Germany, the United States, Great Britain, flying from poles. Their colors are stark contrast to the gray, smoky sky. It's a strange and disorienting sight. The flags of countries that, back in Europe, are teetering on the edge of war with each other, are now the only thing offering protection to a terrified populace. Historians still argue whether the Japanese command ever intended to respect the zone, or if their ambiguous stance was a deliberate tactic to lull the international community into a false sense of security. Whatever their intent, the sheer number of people now in the zone makes it a tempting target for a vengeful army. A quirky tidbit is that the Japanese soldiers, upon seeing the flags, often referred to the zone as the foreigner's big house, a term that was both dismissive and, ironically, a grudging acknowledgement of its existence. You finally cross the invisible line into the zone. The air inside feels different, a little quieter, a little safer, but you know it's a fragile piece. You look back at the chaos you just escaped, and you can't help but think that this place, this little island of hope, is not a permanent refuge, but a final, temporary holding pen. You are safe for now, but you are also trapped. You are now inside the bubble. The feeling of relative safety is a powerful narcotic, but it's quickly replaced by the grim reality of your new circumstances. The international safety zone, which sounded so official and spacious on paper, is now a labyrinth of cramped, overflowing shelters. Every available space, schools, hospitals, private homes, even the lawns, is filled with people. You are packed in shoulder to shoulder, a dense mass of humanity where privacy and personal space are luxuries of a forgotten past. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, fear, and the lingering scent of smoke from the fires burning outside the zone's perimeter. Life within this bubble is a daily struggle for the most basic necessities. You wait in long, shuffling lines for a small bowl of rice gruel, a meager ration that does little to quiet the gnawing hunger in your stomach. Clean water is a scarce and precious commodity. A quirky tidbit, the International Committee, in an act of almost desperate improvisation, begins to use the campus swimming pool at Ginling College as a massive water cistern. Its chlorinated water becoming a life-saving, if slightly odd-tasting, resource for thousands. The Westerners, led by John Rabe, are working around the clock, their faces haggard and their clothes smudged with dirt. They are not just administrators anymore. They are quartermasters, doctors, and negotiators, constantly trying to deal with the overwhelming logistical challenges. The threat from the outside is ever present. You can still hear the sounds of violence, albeit muffled by the walls and the density of the people around you. The Japanese soldiers, despite their supposed acceptance of the zone, are not respecting its boundaries. You hear stories, whispers passed from person to mouth in the dark, of soldiers entering the zone under the pretense of searching for disarmed Chinese soldiers, only to commit acts of horrific violence. Rabe, from his base, is constantly writing letters and sending protests to the Japanese command, using his Nazi Party affiliation as a flimsy shield. A mainstream historical fact is that Rabe's protests, often handwritten and filled with details of specific atrocities, were a constant source of frustration for the Japanese command, who were not used to being challenged in this way. The tension inside the zone is palpable. The mood swings from fear to a kind of quiet despair. You see the faces of your fellow refugees, blank, weary, their eyes hollowed out by the trauma they have witnessed. Historians still argue whether the committee's decision to allow disarmed Chinese soldiers into the zone was a humanitarian triumph or a strategic mistake, as it gave the Japanese a pretext to violate the zone's neutrality. Whatever the case, the presence of these former soldiers, many of them just boys, adds another layer of danger and desperation to the already volatile situation. You watch as these young men, stripped of their uniforms and weapons, try to hide their identities, their fear a constant, silent scream. The air is tense, pregnant with the expectation of violence. The bubble is not a fortress, it's a cage, and the predators are circling outside, testing its flimsy walls. You close your eyes, trying to block out the sounds and smells, but you know that this is not a dream you can wake up from. The fragile calm of the safety zone is shattered by a single, horrifying reality check. You hear the news, not from a broadcast, but from the panicked whispers of people who have just arrived. Their faces ghostly with shock. The Japanese soldiers, in their relentless search for disarmed Chinese soldiers, have taken their brutality to a new level. They are no longer just entering the zone, they are systematically pulling people out, often under the pretense of questioning or moving them to another location, only for them to disappear forever. You hear stories of young men being rounded up and taken to a nearby hill, where their fate is sealed with a bullet. This is Rabe's red pill moment. He's no longer dealing with a distant, abstract conflict. He's now a first-hand witness to the most brutal and systematic violence. John Rabe, the man of protocols and polite letters, is faced with a choice. He can continue to send his letters of protest, a slow, bureaucratic drip of complaints against a tidal wave of violence. Or he can do something more. You see him pacing in his office, his face a mask of grim frustration. The reports from his colleagues and the Chinese staff are growing more and more dire. They're telling him of mass killings, of women being taken and abused, of the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of the Japanese soldiers. A mainstream historical fact is that the number of people killed in the first few days of the occupation was so high that the bodies filled the streets, and the Japanese command had to order their soldiers to burn them in large piles to prevent disease. Rabe and his colleagues are seeing this firsthand, a reality so terrible that it threatens to break their resolve. This is where Rabe's moral compass, which you might have initially questioned given his Nazi affiliation, becomes clear. He is no longer acting as a German businessman or a Nazi party member. He is acting as a human being. He's confronting the true scale of the atrocities happening just outside the zone's walls. A darkness so profound it defies easy categorization. A quirky tidbit is that Rabe's frustration with the Japanese was so intense that he once reportedly tore up one of their official notices in front of a junior officer. An act of defiance that could have easily gotten him killed. He's learning that this war isn't just about territory or political dominance. It's about the complete dehumanization of an entire people. He's seeing the Japanese army as something other than a distant, allied force. He's seeing them as a brutal, indiscriminate killing machine. Historians still argue whether this pivotal moment truly changed Rabe's political views or simply activated a pre-existing humanitarian impulse. Regardless of the debate, the result is the same. Rabe's actions become more direct, more personal, and more dangerous. He stops writing general letters of protest and starts confronting Japanese officers directly, often with his own body. He starts to use his Nazi armband not as a symbol of his political allegiance, but as a shield, a tool to protect the vulnerable. The irony of a swastika being used to save lives is a historical note that is both bizarre and deeply poignant. The bubble of the safety zone is not just being tested, it's being breached. And Rabe knows that if he doesn't act, it will be completely overrun. He is no longer a detached observer, he is a participant. A defender, a man standing against the storm. The breaches in the safety zone's perimeter are no longer just rumors, they are a constant, terrifying reality. You see it for yourself as Japanese soldiers, their bayonets fixed, march into the relative sanctuary, their faces hard and their eyes devoid of compassion. They are not coming to negotiate or to respect the flimsy neutrality of the zone. They are coming to hunt. The river of despair has begun to flow directly through your last hope. You huddle with your family, with your neighbors, as the soldiers move from shelter to shelter, from building to building, pulling people out. You hear the terrified screams of young men being dragged away, their pleas for mercy swallowed by the indifference of the soldiers and the sheer noise of the city's ongoing destruction. This is a complete breakdown of any pretense of international law. The Japanese army is defying every promise they have made, however tacit. They are not just targeting Chinese soldiers, they are targeting anyone who looks like a man, anyone they can suspect of being a combatant. A mainstream historical fact is that Japanese soldiers systematically rounded up tens of thousands of Chinese men, both soldiers and civilians, and marched them to the banks of the Yangtze River where they were summarily executed. The river, once a symbol of the city's lifeblood, becomes a mass grave, a chilling testament to the scale of the atrocity. Inside the zone, the International Committee is in a state of frantic, desperate action. John Rabe, once a man who relied on bureaucracy, is now a man of direct, physical confrontation. He is using his German nationality and his Nazi party affiliation as a weapon, a shield, to try and stop the soldiers. You see him, a man in his 50s, with his Nazi armband clearly visible, rushing from one incident to the next, his voice booming with authority, even if his heart is pounding with fear. A quirky tidbit: Rabe, in a move of pure audacity, once stood in front of a group of armed soldiers and demanded they release a group of Chinese women they had taken. The soldiers, confused by the swastika and the sheer gall of the man, complied, if only for a moment. This kind of personal intervention, while it saved a few lives, couldn't stop the overall slaughter. The moral and ethical lines have been completely blurred. Historians still argue whether Rabe's use of the Nazi swastika, a symbol of hatred and death, to save lives was an act of profound irony or a pragmatic choice in an impossible situation. The question is a difficult one, a paradox that challenges the very nature of good and evil. For you, huddled in a corner, watching the terrifying scene unfold, the symbol on Rabe's arm is not a sign of a political ideology, it is a sign of hope. A desperate, final hope in a world that has gone mad. The river of despair is flowing strong, but Rabe and his committee are still trying to build a dam. A small, fragile barrier against a force that seems unstoppable. The screams are getting closer, and you close your eyes, praying that the swastika, a symbol you would normally revile, will be enough to protect you. The river of despair is now a torrent, and you watch as John Rabe, the man who once managed a factory, becomes a full-time rescuer, a defender of the defenseless. He's no longer just sending letters, he's now a man of direct, often risky, action. You see him rush from his office to a commotion nearby, his Nazi armband a stark splash of color against his coat. The sight is an almost surreal tableau, a high-ranking Nazi, the man who represents the ideology of racial purity, is using his power to protect the lives of people the Japanese see as subhuman. You can't help but feel a strange mix of gratitude and revulsion. This is the very essence of Rabe's personal crusade, to save as many as he can, one life at a time. From the fire, you see him come across a group of Japanese soldiers who have cornered a dozen young men, accusing them of being former soldiers. Rabe, his voice booming with a confidence he likely doesn't feel, confronts the Japanese officer. He uses a mix of fluent German, broken Japanese, and the sheer force of his personality to argue his case. He points to his Nazi armband and reminds the officer of the German-Japanese alliance, a powerful card to play in this grim game of life and death. He argues that these are civilians, that their lives must be spared, and that the honor of the Japanese army is at stake. He is, in essence, holding a mirror up to a military that has lost its way. An act of almost unimaginable bravery. A mainstream historical fact is that Rabe's direct intervention, sometimes involving him physically standing between the soldiers and their victims, saved the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. These were not just anonymous acts, they were personal, face-to-face confrontations. You hear the stories whispered from person to person in the crowded shelters. Rabe-san saved my brother from being taken. He stopped the soldiers from burning down our house. He becomes a folk hero, a kind of modern-day knight in a world where chivalry and honor have been completely forgotten. A quirky tidbit is that Rabe's German shepherd, a loyal and protective dog named Odin, often accompanied him on his rounds, its presence sometimes enough to intimidate junior soldiers who were wary of offending a high-ranking foreign official. It's a strange and funny detail in a landscape of unimaginable horror. Historians still debate whether the Japanese command's decision to largely tolerate Rabe's interventions was a sign of grudging respect for their ally, a cynical ploy to create a facade of legitimacy for their actions. or simply a byproduct of the chaos of the occupation. Whatever the reason, it gives Rabe a small, fragile window of opportunity to do good in a sea of evil. He is working within the system, using its own perverse logic against it. He is using the symbol of Nazism, a symbol of hatred, as a tool for compassion. It is a paradox that is hard to reconcile, a moral knot that is impossible to untangle. But for you, watching this, the man and his actions are all that matter. He is saving lives. He is fighting the fire with everything he has. And for now, that is all that matters. While John Rabe is busy saving lives in the streets, he is also waging a silent, private battle in his study. He's a man who understands the importance of documentation, a man who knows that in the face of such overwhelming brutality, the truth must be preserved. And so, in the quiet, stolen moments between his desperate acts of heroism, he is writing. He's keeping a diary, a meticulous, detailed, and utterly heartbreaking account of what he is witnessing. You imagine him now, sitting at his desk, the sound of distant gunfire and screams providing a grim soundtrack to his work. He writes with a sense of urgency, as if he knows that what he is documenting is not just for himself, but for the world. This diary is not a flowery, literary work. It is a raw, unvarnished chronicle of evil. He writes down the dates, the times, the locations, the names of the victims, and the horrific details of the atrocities. He's creating a historical record, a witness statement, against a regime that will later try to deny that any of this ever happened. He is meticulously documenting everything he sees, hears, and is told. He writes of the systematic murders, the rapes, the burnings, the utter breakdown of civilization. A mainstream historical fact is that John Rabe's diaries, along with those of Minnie Vautrin and a few others, became one of the most crucial pieces of evidence used to refute Japanese denials of the massacre for decades to come. You imagine him writing, his hand shaking, his heart heavy, trying to capture the sheer scale of the horror on paper. He is a German businessman, a member of the Nazi Party, a man who, in any other context, would be seen as part of a problematic, if not outright evil, regime. But here, in Nanjing, he is a historian, a witness, a chronicler of a city's last, desperate moments. A quirky tidbit is that he initially used the Siemens Company's stationery for his diary entries. A bizarre mix of corporate bureaucracy and personal, humanitarian witness that perfectly encapsulates the strange reality of the situation. He's not just documenting the Japanese atrocities, he's also documenting the incredible resilience of the Chinese people and the bravery of his fellow committee members. Historians still debate whether Rabe's diaries were written with the intention of being published or if they were simply a way for him to process the trauma of what he was witnessing. Regardless of his initial intent, the diaries become a powerful tool, a voice for the voiceless. They are a secret held in a city where everything else is being destroyed. They are a testament to the idea that even in the face of absolute evil, the truth must be preserved. The diary is a fragile thing, a book of words and paper, but it is more powerful than a tank, more enduring than a bomb. It is a weapon against oblivion. A secret diary of a Nazi that will one day expose the dark heart of a war. You can almost feel the weight of it, the gravity of its truth. In the air, the crescendo of violence finally fades. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, a slow and agonizing descent into a chilling quiet. You have survived, a testament to luck, resilience, and the fragile protection of the safety zone. But the city you emerge into is not the city you knew. Nanjing is no longer a bustling capital. It is a city of ghosts. You walk through the streets, and the silence is more terrifying than the noise of the bombs. The streets are littered with debris, the charred remains of buildings, and the still, cold bodies of the dead. The once vibrant city is a monochromatic landscape of gray and black, a monument to a brutality that is impossible to comprehend. The stench of death hangs in the air, a thick, cloying smell that you know will never leave your memory. You pass by familiar landmarks, a bustling market, a small tea shop, a temple, and find them all ruined. hollowed-out shells of their former selves. The people who are left, the survivors, move with a slow, deliberate purpose, their faces blank with shock and grief. They are not talking. They are simply existing, moving through the wreckage of their lives. A mainstream historical fact is that the Japanese forces, in a desperate attempt to cover up their crimes, would often burn the bodies of their victims in massive piles, creating a gruesome and horrific pyre that could be smelled for miles. This deliberate act of destruction was not just meant to dispose of the evidence but also to terrorize and demoralize the remaining population. Inside the safety zone, the atmosphere is one of profound exhaustion and trauma. The Westerners, including John Rabe, are still working, but their work has changed. They are now dealing with the aftermath, the unimaginable human cost of the massacre. They are trying to organize aid, to provide food and medical care to the survivors, and to help people find their loved ones. A quirky tidbit is that in the immediate aftermath, Rabe personally organized a search party to try and find the bodies of a few of the people he had tried to save. A small, personal act of closure in a situation that had none. He's no longer just a protector. He's a comforter, a witness to a grief so deep it feels like an open wound. Historians still debate the exact number of people killed in the Nanjing massacre. The figures range from 40.00 to over 300.000. A wide and contentious gap that speaks to the difficulty of documenting a mass atrocity. The debate itself is a testament to the effectiveness of the Japanese government's decades-long campaign of denial. But for you, walking through the shattered streets, the number is irrelevant. You are surrounded by the evidence. The ghosts of a city that was once full of life. You see the haunted eyes of a child who has lost their parents. The hunched shoulders of an old man who has lost his home. The numbers may be debated, but the pain is not. The city of ghosts is a reality, a permanent scar on the face of history. You are a survivor, but you are also a witness. And you know that you can never truly escape what you have seen. The nightmare is over, but a new kind of tragedy is about to unfold. The International Committee for the Nanjing Safety Zone, its mission largely complete, begins to disband. The Westerners who stayed behind to protect the Chinese people are now, one by one, preparing to leave. For you, a survivor of the massacre, this is a moment of profound sadness and uncertainty. The men and women who you once looked to as saviors are now leaving you behind in a city that is a hollow shell of its former self. And at the heart of this exodus is John Rabe. He is not leaving by choice, but by order. The Siemens Company, concerned about his safety and the political ramifications of his actions, is recalling him to Germany. The farewell is a difficult and emotional moment. You see him standing there, a sturdy figure who has become a symbol of hope. He is saying goodbye to the people he protected, the people he risked his life for. He is saying goodbye to the Chinese staff who worked tirelessly alongside him, to the American missionaries he collaborated with, to the survivors who look at him with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. A mainstream historical fact is that on his last day in Nanjing, John Rabe was presented with an embroidered silk banner by the Chinese people, bearing the words, "Protector of the Chinese." It was a gesture of profound respect and gratitude, a testament to his humanitarian efforts in the face of unimaginable evil. You watch him go, and a sense of fear creeps back into your heart. The swastika on his arm, which once seemed like a protective shield, is now just a symbol of the country he is returning to. He is leaving you behind in a city that is under the control of the very army he spent weeks defying. He is leaving, and you know that the small, fragile bubble of safety he created will not last. You are left to wonder what will happen to the people he left behind, and what will happen to the city itself. A quirky tidbit is that Rabe took with him several large, detailed maps of the safety zone, annotated with his own handwriting, as well as his now famous diary. These items would later become crucial evidence of the massacre, but at the time, they were simply his personal mementos of a city in its darkest hour. Historians still debate whether Rabe's recall was a calculated move by the German government to distance themselves from his actions and placate their Japanese allies. or simply a bureaucratic decision made by his company for his own safety. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. The man who became a symbol of hope for the people of Nanjing is now gone. He is heading back to a country that is on the brink of its own descent into madness, leaving behind a city that is already in the depths of its own. The farewell is not a happy one. It is a moment of profound sadness, a final act in a tragedy that has already claimed so many lives. You are left with the silence, the wreckage, and the memory of a man who, for a brief moment, used a symbol of hatred to save lives. You are left with a city in mourning, and a future that is deeply uncertain. John Rabe's journey back to Germany is a stark, disorienting transition from the hellscape of Nanjing to the grim, ordered reality of Nazi Berlin. He arrives not as a conquering hero but as a man burdened by an incredible secret. A witness to a crime so immense it challenges the very notion of humanity. His first instinct is not to forget, but to tell. He wants to share what he saw, to expose the atrocities committed by Germany's ally, Japan. He takes his diary, a meticulous chronicle of the massacre, to his superiors at the Siemens Company, and then to the German Foreign Ministry. He believes that the truth, presented in a cold, bureaucratic fashion, will force the government to act. You can almost see him now, a man full of righteous indignation, his face still etched with the trauma of Nanjing, trying to reason with a regime that values political alliances over human lives. His attempt to publicize his diaries is a swift and predictable failure. He is met not with sympathy or horror, but with indifference and hostility. The German government, a key ally of Japan through the Anti-Comintern Pact, has no interest in hearing about Japanese war crimes. The last thing they want is for a high-ranking Nazi official to be going around telling the world about the brutality of their allies. Rabe is ordered to keep silent. His diaries are confiscated, and he is warned that any further attempts to publicize the events in Nanjing will be met with severe consequences. A mainstream historical fact is that Rabe was even briefly arrested by the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, and interrogated, a stark reminder of the danger he was in. He is silenced. His voice, which was once a shield for thousands, is now being muffled by his own government. This is a profound and cruel twist of fate. The very political affiliation that gave him the authority to protect people in Nanjing is now being used to silence him in Germany. The swastika on his arm, which you once saw as a symbol of hope, is now a chain, a symbol of a regime that values power over compassion. A quirky tidbit is that Rabe, in a final act of quiet defiance, managed to get a copy of his diary to a few Western journalists and diplomats before it was confiscated. A small but significant act of rebellion that would later ensure his story was not completely forgotten. He is a man caught between two worlds, the world of his actions and the world of his government. He is a hero in one, and a pariah in the other. Historians still debate whether Rabe's initial faith in the Nazi government's moral compass was a genuine belief or a naive hope born out of desperation. Was he so blinded by his loyalty to the party that he couldn't see its true nature? Or was he simply a man who believed, to his core, that justice would prevail? Regardless of the answer, the result is the same. The man who saved so many in Nanjing is now powerless and alone in Berlin. He is a prophet without an audience, a witness without a courtroom. He is a righteous man in an unrighteous world, and his voice has been silenced. The darkness that he fought so hard against in China has now followed him home. And it has won. After the war, with the Nazi regime in ruins and the world grappling with the scale of the Holocaust, John Rabe's story remains largely unknown and unappreciated. He is not celebrated as a war hero or a humanitarian. Instead, he is a forgotten man, living a quiet, impoverished life in post-war Berlin. The same Allied authorities who were prosecuting other Nazis for their crimes now view him with suspicion. His Nazi party membership, once his ticket to authority, is now a mark of shame. He is, for a time, denazified, a process that strips him of his job and his reputation. The man who risked his life to save thousands is now treated as an enemy of the state. a pariah in his own country. It's a cruel and bitter irony, a final, painful twist in his already extraordinary story. You imagine him now, an old man, living in a ruined city. The memories of Nanjing, of the screams and the fire, must still haunt him, but he has no one to share them with. The world has moved on, grappling with its own traumas. The Nanjing massacre, for all its horror, is a footnote in the larger narrative of World War II, a war crime overshadowed by the sheer scale of the Holocaust. A mainstream historical fact is that in 1948, a group of former residents of Nanjing, who had been saved by Rabe, learned of his plight and sent him a letter of thanks and a small sum of money to help him through his financial struggles. It was a beautiful, small gesture of gratitude, a flicker of light in his otherwise dark and forgotten life. It was a sign that his work had not been in vain, that the people he saved had not forgotten him. This is a story of a hero who was never truly recognized as one. He is not on the cover of magazines, he does not receive awards. He is simply a man who did the right thing in the worst of circumstances and paid a heavy price for it. A quirky tidbit is that for a time, Rabe was so destitute that he had to sell his few remaining possessions just to buy food for his family. He was a man who, at the end of his life, was struggling to survive, a stark contrast to the life he had once lived as a high-ranking executive. Historians still debate whether Rabe's post-war obscurity was a result of his Nazi past, the world's general ignorance of the Nanjing massacre, or a combination of both. Whatever the reason, his story remains a powerful and poignant example of a man who was ahead of his time. A man whose morality transcended the ideology he was born into. He died in 1950, a forgotten savior, his story a secret held by a few loyal friends and a small community of survivors in a distant land. His life is a testament to the idea that a single person, in the face of unimaginable evil, can still make a difference. His legacy, once silenced, would eventually be unearthed, a powerful reminder of what happened in Nanjing and the man who stood against it. You can't help but feel a pang of sadness for this man. A man who, for a brief, shining moment, was a beacon of hope in a world of darkness, only to be forgotten by history. The sun has set on John Rabe's life, but the tale of his actions and the tragedy he witnessed continues to echo through history. A powerful and complex legacy that is still being unraveled today. You look back on the story of the Nanjing massacre, of the brave and desperate acts of a handful of Westerners, and you can't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. The story is not a simple one of good versus evil. It is a tale of moral paradoxes, of a Nazi who was also a humanitarian, of a city that was almost erased from history, and of a world that was slow to listen. John Rabe's legacy is a tale of two parts. On one hand, he is remembered as the Oskar Schindler of China, a man who used his unique position to save thousands of lives. His diaries, once confiscated and silenced, were eventually rediscovered and published, becoming a crucial historical document that helped to expose the truth of the Nanjing massacre. A mainstream historical fact is that in 1997, the John Rabe House and Memorial Hall were established in Nanjing, a testament to his heroic actions and a place for people to learn about his story. He is celebrated as a hero in China, a man who, despite his political affiliation, chose to stand with humanity. On the other hand, Rabe's legacy is forever intertwined with the ideology he was a part of. The swastika on his arm, which you once saw as a symbol of hope, is a symbol of a regime that was responsible for the systematic murder of millions. This is the central paradox of his life, a complex and difficult truth that historians still grapple with. Historians still argue whether Rabe's actions should be viewed as a moral stand against Nazism or simply as a rare instance of a good man acting within a brutal system. The debate is a reflection of the difficulty of reconciling the good a person does with the evil they are associated with. A quirky tidbit is that for years, the Chinese government, in a gesture of appreciation, sent a monthly pension to his descendants, a quiet acknowledgement of the debt they owed to him. You look at the end of this journey, and you are left with the enduring impact of the Nanjing massacre on global history. It is a story that reminds us of the horrors that can be unleashed by a nation at war, of the fragility of civilization, and of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It is also a story that reminds us that heroes can come from the most unexpected places, that a single person can make a difference, and that the truth, no matter how hard it is to hear, must always be preserved. The ghosts of Nanjing will always be with us, a quiet but powerful reminder of what happened, and a challenge to us all to never let it happen again. As the echoes of the city fade into the distance, so too do the sounds of our journey. The shouts and the screams, the gunfire and the explosions, are now just whispers in the wind. The flickering images of a city in flames, of a man with a swastika on his arm, of the faces of the survivors, they begin to blur, to soften. We are no longer in the chaos of 1937 China, but here, now, in the quiet of your room. The tension in your shoulders can finally release. Let your breath come slow and deep. The figures we've followed are just memories now, and their struggle has come to an end. The ghosts of history are fading, and you are safe, tucked away from the darkness we've explored. Let the peaceful silence fill the spaces where the noise once was. The story is over, and all that's left is the soft hum of the night, a gentle lullaby to carry you off.